Welcome to your very first day in Figma. Now, I'm going to make the assumption that this is your first time. Maybe it hasn't, but it really doesn't matter because I'm not going to teach all of the Figma features all in one video or even all in one crash course. I think you learn best when you have relevance and you have context and you have purpose. So instead of trying to teach all the features, we're going to teach concepts about design, and in doing so, we will learn the features that are necessary to complete them. So in other words, we're going to start very simple in terms of what I'm teaching you in terms of layout design. And by nature, it's not going to require you to use a bunch of tools because we're starting simple. All right, so we only have to know a tiny part of Figma in order to achieve these ends. But of course, as we go through the curriculum and we increase the complexity of the projects, we will also learn more of the advanced features and intermediate features of Figma. So when you log in, you create your account, you log in, you're going to have this right here, this page, and these are just my recent projects. You're not going to have any if you just created your own project. So there'll probably be something here that says create your first project or something similar. If not, click on new up here, and we want a design file because we want to design. So when we do that, we have a very simple user interface here. There's not much to it really. We have a few panels just to go over real quick. You have your layers and assets panels, and also your page breakdowns when you have multiple pages. Up here we have a toolbar, and this is a frame or a slice tool. We're going to get into frames in a second here. This is just some basic drawing tools, which we're going to use a lot. We're going to use the rectangle here. We have our pen tool, the dreaded pen tool. Don't worry, we'll get to that. Your type tool, and also we have a hand tool, and we'll get to all these things, but just don't worry about them too much at this point in time. Over here is what we call, this is a property inspector. When you select an element, you'll see properties show up here. There's also a prototype tab, and we'll get into prototyping, of course, and also an inspect tab. And that's all we need to know for now. In here, there's nothing that we can really design for because we don't have what's called a frame. And so we want to come over here and just choose frame. And when we do that, in the properties inspector, we have something that says phone, tablet, desktop, presentation, watch, paper, social media, Figma community. It might be more depending on when you watch this. Now, we want to design for a full experience just for this particular example. So we're going to choose desktop. All right, and I'm going to choose the desktop preset right here, and you can see these pixel values, 1440 by 1024 rather. So we click that, and it's going to place this frame here based on or according to what we chose, which is the desktop 1440. And what we can do from here, if we wish, we can change the width right here and the height over here, or we could change it just by eyeballing it by dragging up. I kind of like more of like a 16:9 ratio. So I'm working at 1534 by 892. You don't have to have, it specifically with what I have. I just kind of like this sort of, I guess you could say aspect ratio right here. All right, so what I want to demonstrate is a very simple concept. We're going to work with just two typographic elements, and we're going to create a layout out of it just with those two elements. And you're probably thinking, just with two type layers, that's kind of strange, it's going to look silly, but you're going to see we have a lot of creative freedom as long as we operate within the parameters of the UI design fundamentals, of which I've spoken about at length, at least in the beginning part of this curriculum. So let's go ahead and get some type. We're only going to work with two type elements here. So you can click on the little T up here, or just hit T on your keyboard to switch to the type tool. So there's two ways you can actually get type onto your frame here. You can left click once and just start typing the greatest show, or we could also hit T and left click and drag the greatest show. Now what's the difference? It's really not much difference because we can still take both of these and adjust them as needed in terms of the width. So we'll stick with this top one up here. And we want to use this font. Now, it may have chosen a different font for you. This font right over here in the property inspector, when you have the type layer selected, under text is Newton, Neuton. So type that in, hit enter, and you'll also have the same type. Now, also, the size is controlled by this area right here, in which we currently have at 96 pixels. So we also want to have a second type layer, and that's all we're going to be working with. We're going to change one more constraint in a little bit, but for now we just have two type layers. One is a heading, and one will be a subheading. All right, so let's just duplicate this. That means Control D will duplicate it, and we'll move it down. Now I'm going to back up, hit Control Z to undo your last change, and if I can move things around, and you'll see these little red areas, these little lines show up, and that's just your alignment tools to let you know that you're aligned with certain areas or elements that are adjacent to it. You can also hold Shift to make sure it stays on this vertical axis when you pull down and hit Shift, or if you push right and hit Shift, it'll keep you on this axis right here. So let's just move it down somewhere, and we're going to give ourselves a subheading. And so for this subheading, we're going to use witness a once in a lifetime event, period. All right. So we operating with the idea that we only have these two elements to work with, and as well as this frame or this canvas here. How can we create a layout just with these two elements? So that's might be a little bit tricky, but it's really not once you understand alignment. And right now we also have to reinforce visual hierarchy. And if you recall, that means directing the eye to the most important element, essentially. So what's the most important element if this is the headline and this is kind of like a sub-headline? Well, it's going to be the headline. So we want it to be, we can use scale in order to draw attention to it and reinforce that typographic visual hierarchy. So we'll make this one smaller. So you can left click here and see where it kind of highlighted this in blue. We can use our down arrow key on our keyboard to change the size, and you can also use these preset sizes over here. So for now, let's just leave it right around 42, and this one is right around 96. So how can we create a layout? Like for instance, if we just randomly place things here, it doesn't look that good. So we have to make a decision in terms of, maybe do we want this centered within our container? Our container in this context being just the whole frame or the whole kind of like the web page or the whole browser that you see. Or do we want to left align it? Do we want to right align it? So we have a lot of options. So the most simple option is just to center things. So let's get this situated right there. And we can center things a couple ways here in Figma. We can move it up. Right there is the center. You see the center line? So you can just move things around, and eventually you will find that center, and it kind of sticks to that position even though you're moving the mouse. Or we can just click right here, align horizontal centers. Does the same exact thing. Now you can also align things here vertical by clicking this icon, and now it's centered vertically and horizontally. So now let's do the same thing with our type right here. Now you want to make sure that this is right there, and we can move it into place. Now both of these are situated in such a way that they're both centered, but they're not centered vertically, so it looks a little strange if we don't have anything else here, and it's up a little bit high, so we have too much white space here on the bottom as compared to the top. So if we take both of these, you would think if we click on this, the align vertical centers, it would work, but it doesn't. We would have to first group these. So if you look over here in the layers, we take both of these, but by left clicking and dragging and hit Control G, we'll create a group, which we can then extend over here in the layers panel. But now if we take that group, we can now click the align vertical centers, and now it is aligned vertically inside of this layout. And so this works. And by the way, when you have a group, you can double click and we can access the specific elements within that group. Maybe you want to make this a little bit larger. I'm deciding I want to make it larger. So we can drag this to the right and then make sure this is centered here vertically. Also, we will want to make sure that this is centered horizontally as well. All right, so this right here would be acceptable. It's like one of the most simple examples of a layout based on these constraints that we've created. But there's so much more we can do. So I'm going to show you a bunch of variations that we can use for this. So let's duplicate this. So we take the artboard, Control D, and it will create a second one right here. And this way we can kind of create, a copy of all the different iterations that we've done so far. So what we want to do now is let's experiment with other ways to create a layout just with these elements. Maybe before we do that, we could talk a little bit about visual hierarchy. This might be a good time. Right here is a pretty good visual hierarchy between these two elements. This is 105 and this is 42. But again, remember, we can use our other UI design fundamentals to create other instances of visual hierarchy. So for instance, we could take our little subheadline, and we could also use color or contrast. So we'll use contrast in this case by just making this a little bit less contrast right there. So now we've kind of increased the visual hierarchy, because if you look at these two, your eye is going to be more drawn towards the completely black or the higher contrast element. Plus it also has scale working for it as well. So now let's experiment a little bit more with some alternative layouts. So we can right click and ungroup. And now let's go ahead and this time align everything to the left. So what we'll do is we'll push this over here. If you hit Control R on your, or Shift R rather, sorry, you're gonna see these little rulers come out. You can hit Shift R again to hide them and toggle on and off. We can go ahead and left click and drag this vertical ruler. And this just kind of just gives us a point of reference when it comes to alignment. If I hit Shift R, again, the rulers will hide. So that's just one way. If you want to get rid of one, just drag it off, and there we go. So let's get that back right up to next to this, the greatest show. And then we can put this right here. We'll know it is aligned. Hit Shift R to get rid of that. And there we go. This is one other potential alternative layout. Now, if we want to fill out this area more, we can do something different. For instance, we can drag this in. Now let's put this to the bottom. Now we can reduce the leading, which is the actual distance between the lines of type here, by clicking right here, and we can just enter a value on our keyboard specifically or use the down arrow key. All right, now look at that. That looks pretty cool. At this time, let's go ahead also increase the visual hierarchy. How else can we do that? Font weight. So we can make this bold. There we go. Why not? So now let's go ahead, Shift R, make sure everything is in line. We could take both of these, hit Control G, and then align it here vertically as well. Shift R, and look at that. So now this size works. Everybody's going to be able to read it. Good visual hierarchy, good alignment. Everything is symmetrical in terms of the being centered here vertically. Good white space all around, and we know that because it is centered vertically. And this works completely fine. Now you have leeway in terms of the size that you want to use. Because there's not really anything else, we can really boost up the size of some of these elements. So we can make this much larger, and then maybe turn down, or turn up rather, the leading. Let's increase this. And then double click in here, pull that down, and then make sure this is also positioned where it needs to be. And this works too. All right, so how about we also play around with the actual type which you have at your disposal. So let's duplicate this, Control D. We'll take this right here where it says the, and let's delete that. Pull this down. We're going to duplicate it, Control D, hold shift, move it up with your mouse by left clicking and dragging. We'll put the on its own type layer. And then we'll put this here, and let's scale this down quite a bit. Maybe right there. Maybe we can put it right there. Maybe we could put it right there. I think that makes more sense in my opinion. Right there looks pretty good. So we're emphasizing or de-emphasizing just the word the, and we create a little bit more of a variance within the topography and the layout as a whole. So we could also do this. Let's duplicate that frame right there, and let's try right aligning it. All right, so Shift R, let's just take this and put it over here somewhere. And then let's take this element and we'll make sure this is right aligned. So you click on the right align option right here. So that'll right align it inside of the actual text container. We're gonna push this over here. We're gonna put this right here. And then we'll drag this over here. So Shift R. All right, and look at that. These all work. So we have a lot of variations. Guess what? We can come up with even more. So let's duplicate this one. And what if we wanted to create 2 columns? All right, because everything right now is stacked vertically on rows. So let's right click this and ungroup it. And let's take this type element and let's put it over here somewhere. All right, we'll move this over. Now let's hit Control R. Now let's drag down a horizontal line. And we have a lot of options for where we choose to place this. So we could choose to place it right where the top of the T and the starts. Let's hit Shift R. That can work. Shift R again, let's move this down. We could go right here. Shift R, that works as well. So there's a lot of options for where you choose to place this. And all of this works. So there's probably many other variations in terms of where and how you choose to create a layout, even with just 2 elements, and they're just 2 type-based elements. We don't have any icons, we don't have any photographs, we don't have any rectangular containers, we have nothing. But we can still create something that looks interesting because we've used at our disposal all the UI design fundamentals. We have contrast here, which is perfect. We have maximum contrast, in fact. We have visual hierarchy, which separates this from this and this from that. And we also have alignment working with us very well in scale. Now, what if I threw in a third option where we now have the ability to use a rectangle somewhere in order to define this layout visually, in a sense? All right, well, let's go ahead and try that. So let us go ahead, and I think what we'll do is, let's take this one. We'll duplicate that. Let's put this down. I'm just gonna drag it. By the way, you can pan around by holding the space bar and just left clicking and dragging. So we'll be doing that often. So let's put this over here. Let's take this and we're just gonna put it right here. And I think what we'll do is we'll scale things down a little bit. Let's right click first and ungroup. And let's get it a little bit smaller of a size. So we're gonna go right there. Now there's a lot of leading, so I wanna bring things back up. So that's 108 for the font size, and for the leading, we're gonna decrease it to about 91. And then for we'll make this a little bit smaller as well. Again, when we do this, we wanna make sure we're lined up with any guides that exist. So we're gonna pull this here, push this to there. We're gonna decrease the size of that from 42. And let's right align it within this element. There we go. We could take both of them, Control G, and then align it vertically. Hit Shift R. All right, I know I'm moving fast with all these keyboard shortcuts, but you'll get it through muscle memory eventually. So now let's actually, you know what? I'm gonna make an adjustment here. Let's just click on there once, right click, ungroup. I'm gonna push this over here, and we're just gonna align it with Shift R right there. So we're gonna move this into place. Hold Control on your keyboard, or the equivalent for Mac, of course, and mouse scroll wheel to zoom in. Sometimes you'll need to do that, and then that way we can place this exactly where we want it to be. Sometimes you can also use your keyboard arrow to also slightly nudge things as you need to. All right, so that's looking pretty good right there. If you wish, you can also drag another vertical column here. All right, Shift R. Now let's go ahead and use, for the first time, the rectangle tool. All right, so how can we use a rectangle in this layout? So there's a lot of different ways, and there's many ways, and I'll show you just a few of them. First way, we can just put something right here. Now this is a mid-gray by default, so when you select an actual shape like this, you'll have a fill option, and that changes the color of it. So you can see it's kind of like this mid-gray, mid-tone there. I'm going to choose kind of like in the yellow hue, and we're going to make it tinted quite a bit. We're a little bit of tone coming down here, right there. So the color code, there's a hex code that gives you the ability to type in this 6-character hex code, as it's called, to get the same exact color that I have, and that's F0EFFE0. So we'll hit enter, make sure that that is there. Now we can also change if the design and the colors are clashing with the background of Figma right here, we can also change that. So we just select it, and then in the properties inspector, we can change this to something that can contrast quite a bit. So I'm just coming down here with 353535 for the hex code. All right, great. So now we hit X there. So this is just one way that we can add a rectangle, and it kind of adds something to this design. It adds color, it adds variation, it adds texture. Where else could we put this? Well, not like that. We need to make sure we sort this. So to resort your layers, you could just right click and send to back or send backwards. Send backwards, watch where it goes in relation to its current position in the layers panel. So if we choose send backwards, it just pushes it back 1. If we right click and send to back, it goes all the way to the bottom of this particular frame. All right, you can also left click and drag and move things up and down. So because this is a very low contrast, a relatively low contrast element in relation to the type which is sitting on top of it, we can do what's kind of called an asymmetrical layout, where we can just put this even behind the text. If this color was something that was like this, you would not want to do this, because now we have readability issues. It would not pass the WCAG color contrast guidelines. So you want to make sure, if we hit Control Z a couple times, we'll get back to the original color. You want to make sure if you do something like this, that you have enough contrast from the element that's sitting on it. So we could do something like that even. We could Control D, duplicate. I'll show you some more examples. We could, let's Shift R. Let's move this over here. Oops. Let's move this back down here. All right, Shift R again. And we can move it right there. One thing I wouldn't do is moving it right there. That looks strange. So you want to have still white space, and you don't want to put your containers, your background elements perfectly in line with the column in which elements like type elements are sitting. So give yourself a little bit of white space, and it will look and flow much better. So this is completely acceptable. This would be acceptable as well, because again, it's a low contrast element. All right, so what else can we do? Let's duplicate this. Control D. Let's grab this one, for instance. We'll take this. So just select this group, hit Control C to copy. We're going to delete these. Just select it, left click, delete, delete. And then with this frame selected, Control V and paste. So now we can paste in elements that exist on other frames. So let's zoom up with Control mouse wheel. This works. Again, we can really put this thing anywhere. But we could also do something, quite a bit different. We can drag this down perhaps. And we could do that. Why not? Again, it's a low contrast element. There's a lot that we can do with it without doing something that looks kind of silly like this. We could also create a row out of it like that. What if we also came over here and we did this broken layout thing like that? That could work as well. That could possibly work, although it's a little bit high for this particular container. We have a lot of empty space down here. And there we go. So just out of 2 type elements in one graphic element, like a rectangle, we're able to create all these iterations, and there's 10 of them, and I guarantee you there's probably over 100 that you could create and still create a design that looks pretty solid. All right, so in the next module, I know this was a lengthy video, but I really wanted to describe this as much as possible. In the next module, it's going to be the very first challenge where you actually have to do something and submit work so that I can look at it and review it. And it's going to be based on something very similar to this. And so we have a lot of constraints here. That way we can maximize your chances of producing something that looks good.